Welcome to Smaller Solutions. Today we have a very interesting video for you on the Colt LMG. Now, about a year or so ago, we did a video on the Colt IAR Infantry Automatic Rifle, which was a very similar concept. Now, since the development of the M16 rifle or AR-15 rifle, there has been attempts to make it into a suppressive fire weapon or a light machine gun. If we go back to the earliest days where we're looking at the model R606, which was the M16 rifle M1, which is basically a heavy barrel rifle utilizing an M60 bipod, but it was a basic rifle. And then we have the M16A2 rifle H-bar M1 R606A and 606B. 606B was a four-way safety where you had safe semi-auto and I believe that was a two-shot burst. Then you had the R06A, which was a standard safe semi and auto. Neither one of those really gained any popularity during its development because they were utilizing a belt-fed cruiser weapon, 7.62mm M16 machine gun. But basically what you did to make this weapon a suppressive fire weapon was you increased the width of the barrel. By increasing the width of the barrel, you increased its heat sink ability to absorb more heat, so the barrel was able to go much longer with more of a suppressive rate. And of course, you want suppressive fire, you have to have a heavier weight. So there's not really a lot of interest into that program. Well, back around 1984, there was a new interest in it within Colt. And Colt's engineer, Henry Tatro. Henry Tatro was an engineer at Colt. He was probably one of Colt's best and their brightest. He was involved in some of the most important programs they'd had during the 80s, including the 9mm submachine gun and several of the pistols. He certainly was one of their best designers that they had. He was tasked with designing a new LMG version of the M16. And he looked at the design and he did a very good assessment of what needed to be changed. But the first thing he decided to do that was out of the ordinary was to go with an open bolt mechanism instead of a closed bolt mechanism. Well, why do you go with an open bolt over a closed bolt? In a suppressive fire weapon where you have a high rate of fire, you have heat that builds up into the barrel, into the chamber. And if you have too much heat there, you have what's referred to as a cook-off. A cook-off is having just the heat of the chamber enough to set the propellant off to cause it to fire. So by having it in the open bolt position, there's never a round left in the chamber at all. There's not a round placed in the chamber until you're in the firing process, which means you pull the trigger, the bolt goes forward, it strips a round off the magazine or the belt into the chamber, and then once the bolt locks, it fires. So it was obviously designed, since we were looking at a heavy support weapon, that we wanted to have a open bolt for safety purposes. Also, that open bolt also decreases your rate of fire, especially the way that it was developed on this rifle. So the first thing I want to talk about is the mechanism that he chose to use. Now you're going to be seeing a chart right now, which is going to show you the entire cycle of operations of the open bolt mechanism. It's a very interesting type of a mechanism because you are not utilizing the same standard hammer disconnector trigger that you would normally use. You're limiting a disconnector altogether. So basically what we have here with the open bolt mechanism is you'll see there's a notch on the underside of the bolt carrier. That notch is engaged by the top of the hammer, as you would see here, that would fit right underneath it. As the trigger would be rotated and pulled downward, the connector would pull downward or would push forward on the autoseer. What this would do is this would lower the hammer. When the hammer is lowered, it allows the bolt carrier to move forward. And then that's when the hammer is will be engaged by the autoseer. So when the trigger is released, the autoseer holds the hammer in place, and as the bolt carrier goes forward, the autoseer is tripped by the bolt carrier, and that releases the hammer to fire. And as long as the trigger is held to the rear, you have that constant motion going back and forth. Then as soon as the trigger is released, the hammer moves upward. And when it moves upward, as the bolt carrier comes back, it engages and it locks the bolt into the open position, so it's ready to fire again. So the next part of the design that Hank Tatro looked at was a new rear sight. He wanted a rear sight that was more fully adjustable than the standard rifle because, again, you're looking at longer ranges with a suppressive fire weapon. So what he did was he looked at the original AR-10 sight. The original AR-10 sight had a elevation windage on the bottom, and that worked out quite well. But what he wasn't happy with was the way that the rear sight was adjusted. He wanted a more fully adjustable rear sight. So as you can see from the photograph of the original prototype LMG, you'll see that the improvement that he made was having a fully adjustable with a dial on the right-hand side. Now, this sight would eventually find its way into the M16A2 program when you add the fully adjustable rear sight with the adjustable for elevation as well. Now, as you can see from the photograph of the original rifle, that he had the M60 bipod and he had a heavy barrel and a new set of handguards. In 1976, another patent was created. That patent created was for a hydraulic buffer. Now, utilizing a hydraulic buffer with an open bolt mechanism, you're able to decrease your rate of fire from the around 850 to 950 rounds a minute of the M16A1, depending on the ammunition that you used, to drop it down to 650 to 750 rounds a minute. Now, when you lower your rate of fire to 650 to 750 rounds a minute, and you combine it with the weight of this barrel, this gun purrs like a kitten. The full-body automatic fire is fully controllable by utilization of the slower rate of fire. You're able to get off 1 and 2 shots with trigger manipulation. The recoil is pretty much nil. You are very easy to get your rounds on target. This hydraulic buffer made a major difference into the function of the gun, and you'll see in the range footage because we're doing some comparisons between the Colt open bolt LMG and the Colt IAR, then see the differences that a hydraulic buffer gives you versus a non-hydraulic buffer, not to mention a full rifle length gas system versus a carbine length gas system in this same type of a suppressive weapon system. So as some of this development was going on, Colt got into some financial trouble, and they also got into some problems with their union. Colt went on to a strike, and that strike would last several years. That would hurt Colt for as far as being able to produce numbers that were necessary for the U.S. government. And it also, with the lack of personnel, basically unhinged any research and development. In 1986, 2 engineers came from Dymaco down to Colt, Canada. Now, just in the mid-'80s is when the Canadian SAR program was completed, their small arms replacement program, where they fully went from the FNFAL C1, C2 rifle into the C7 and C8 rifle. At that time, it was a very small company. It was very not known pretty much outside of Canada. And their production capabilities and their R&D was impressive. And at that time, Colt Industries saw that. They were very impressed with it as well. They were able to take small programs and they were able to get them up and going. And they had a first-rate R&D staff. So Phil Dillon and Ian Anderson from Dymaco around 1986 time period went to visit Colt. And it was on several other reasons. It had nothing to do with new R&D. But both Phil and Ian were shown the open bolt machine gun by Hank Tatro. Now, basically, Hank Tatro was unable to continue with his development because of lack of resources, lack of time, and with issues caused by the strike. And he had felt that, and some of Colt's management had felt that Dymaco was in a much better shape to take a small project like this and bring it to fruition. So my guess is Phil and Ian were talking to Hank, and Hank said, well, why don't you guys take this up to Canada and you develop it? I can see I know Ian saying, take off, you knob, thinking he was joking, that, you're going to give us one of your major projects. Well, after it was all said and done with with management, it was agreed that the LMG program was going to be taken up to Colt, Canada. And then I can imagine Ian telling Hank that, maybe he wasn't such a hoser. He got this program going. So the Canadians took over, Dymaco took over this program. And of course, in that intermediate time, we had updates of the M16A2. So there were several improvements that could be made. Now, the rifle that you see here, this is a semi-automatic only lower receiver. We're going to be supplementing with a lot of footage from the range with a fully automatic lower receiver, so you're able to see how the actual open bolt machine gun works. So we're just going to go over some of the features of this, and then we're going to go right to the range footage where you're going to see a lot more explanation of how this rifle functions, and see some incredible footage of this thing in action. And you'll see for yourself just how much of a, just by your visual, you can see how much of a pleasure this thing is to shoot. No recoil, doesn't move, accurate as can be, a very relatively slow but effective cyclic rate of fire. So the upgrades that the Canadians went to immediately was the barrel. They went to an extremely heavy cold hammer forged barrel. It was the same kind of barrels that they manufactured up north. Now, every barrel that you would ever see on any version of this weapon system were all made in Canada. There was never an American-made barrel for it. So along with going with a much heavier barrel, you'll see that this was a first-generation bipod that was adjustable. It had 2 or 3 adjustments on here. This is the first one. It stowed right underneath. You had a vertical pistol grip. Now, pulling off the handguard here, we see a couple things. We see this monster heavy barrel, which, again, for as far as the rate of fire is concerned, set an incredible rate of fire and could go on for quite some time before it would overheat. So we had the extremely heavy barrel, cold hammer forged, chrome plated. Of course, we had to have a new front sight base that was made for it. This one originally had the Canadian front sight post, which was more of a narrow round type. No bayonet lug on the initial one because it wouldn't fit. We have, of course, we have the handguard cap is rectangular in nature because of the two interchangeable handguards that we would have here with heat shields. But also, you notice there is a vertical pistol grip with a yoke that's drilled and pinned in place here. We also have a carrying handle. Now, I'd like to take a look at the and draw your attention to the gas tube. This gas tube is the first time we have ever seen a straight, non-bended gas tube in this weapons platform. This should be carried over with Colt Defense into the 6940, their one-piece upper receiver program. And it was used prior to that by Lewis Machine & Tool in his MRP program because you have there's no points of bend where you're going to have any kind of heat stress on it. This is also an oversized gas tube as well, which allowed more volume to slow things down. And it also took the heat much better. So the original rifles, which you had was with the thinner barrels, as a safety measure, the gas tube would blow before the barrel would on the full-length rifles. Well, due to the fact that we had a heavy barrel, we totally changed the situation with the heat. They had to redesign a new gas tube to go along with that. We had a new modern A2 updated Delta ring. Now, looking at the upper receiver, this is a production model, which was now took the M16A2 rear sight. We also notice that we do have the fire cartridge case deflector, but no forward assist. You're going to see me discuss in the upcoming video at the range why we don't have a forward assist on an open bolt machine gun, due to the fact that if the bolt was not to lock when it goes forward, as soon as you would slap the forward assist to lock the bolt, you're going to set the cartridge off. Not a good thing. So we don't have that. So we went with a standard A2 buttstock, A2 pistol grip. Now your selector lever is safe in fire. This is not a selective fire rifle. The initial LSWs and the LMGs were strictly open bolt. You had the standard A2 pistol grip, A2 trigger guard. It's again the standard lower receiver. The only other change is what you're going to be discussing as well is the bolt catch. The bolt catch, as you're going to see from a photograph, you have an extended panel that goes down and it goes over the magazine release. It was done due to the fact that this was an open bolt machine gun. When the rifle would lock back on a magazine, that magazine has a further travel than where the hammer engages the bolt carrier for the open bolt machine gun. So when the bolt locks open to the rear, you pull the trigger, the bolt carrier won't move. So what would happen was you would push the magazine release would push in the lower end of that paddle on the bolt catch, and it would release the bolt from the position of the bolt catch forward so the hammer could engage so you're ready to fire on the open bolt mechanism, which we'll see in that video as well. Those are the major features that I want to discuss on this model, and now we're going to go to the range footage.
Taking a look at the Colt LMG, we want to thank Brandon over at the gun room for letting us use his full auto lower receiver that we were able to put the open bolt LMG fire control group in. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we have here. The complete upper receiver is original Colt. Well, actually, it's original Dimaco. This barrel was manufactured by Dimaco in Canada. All the LMG barrels were. As you can see, we're missing the forward assist on here. Well, there's a reason for that, because this is open bolt. When you pull the trigger, you'll see that the bolt goes forward. So obviously, if you're pulling it and it's open bolt, you're not going to be slamming forward with a forward assist. So there's no forward assist on there. Now we see this is an earlier version of the LMG, first production model. You'll see we have the A2 rear sight on here. We have the original handguards, two-piece handguards. We have the carrying handle and the extra heavy barrel. Now, when we take a look at the barrel, you're going to see an incredibly heavy barrel. You're also going to see an incredibly large gas tube on here. The reason for that gas tube is so it will take the heat that's caused by a continuous amount of fire. The original M16s were designed so the gas tube would fail before the lightweight barrel. We have a whole different situation here with this monster heavy barrel. A standard gas tube would go long before the capability of the barrel. So they had to manufacture a stronger gas tube. This is also the first time that a straight gas tube was used. So there's no bend in it. You have a yoke on here for your vertical pistol grip. See it's drilled and pinned as well. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the mechanism. This is a converted lower receiver. It's done through the gun room, Shenandoah. So we're taking a look at how the system works. When you look on the left-hand side, one of the things that is different is you have a whole new bolt catch. Now, if you notice, we have a longer paddle. The reason is when the bolt holds open on the last round, the bolt is now held by the bolt catch. Now, this is being open bolt. When you pull the trigger, the bolt should go forward. So what happens is, when you push inward on the bolt catch, it pushes the bottom portion of the bolt catch, and it returns the bolt to the hammer. So you're ready to fire again in the open bolt position. So the whole purpose of this is when the bolt locks back, the bolt is held back by the bolt catch. When the magazine release is pressed in to release the magazine, it releases the bolt catch, so the bolt goes forward and is caught by the hammer. So as we'll see, our cycle of operations is when the weapon is loaded, you pull the trigger, it fires. And we'll continue firing until the trigger is released. When the trigger is released, the hammer rises up and it catches on the sear on the bottom of the bolt carrier, which we're going to take a look at now. Now we're going to take a close look at the operating mechanism of the open bolt. At the bottom of the bolt carrier, you'll see that we have a notch. And you will see that we have a notch on the hammer. So the purpose of that notch is when this is in the cock position or open position, the hammer is engaging the bottom of that carrier, which is holding it rearward. When the trigger is pulled, the trigger releases to go forward. Then as the bolt carrier moves forward, it goes into the lock position. As we'll see here, the back of the carrier will trip the auto sear to release the hammer. When the trigger is pulled to the rear, the bolt will continue moving back and forth, uninterrupted until the trigger is released. And at that point, the hammer will go up, it will engage that notch, and it will lock it open to the rear. The sear trip will engage the auto sear, releasing the hammer to fire, and then everything else. The auto sear's only purpose is to keep that hammer from falling until the bolt's in the lock position. Now, the other neat really aspect about this is you're going to see from the fact that this is a very smooth shooting, low cyclic rate, is the fact that we use a hydraulic buffer. The hydraulic buffer's whole purpose is to lower the rate of fire to over about 600 to 750 rounds a minute versus over 1,000 rounds a minute, which you're going to see like with the newer Colt IAR. Now, this was only used on the open bolt versions. This wasn't very common to see this version being used on the selective fire one with closed bolt, but on the open bolt it was quite common. There was some of these that were made in the smaller carbine as well. This particular hydraulic buffer is probably the most durable and reliable that's ever been put out. This is the only one that I've ever seen that has gotten military service out of it. Now, once this thing sees its service life, there is a refurbishing kit that goes with it where you can rebuild this to repair it. I've never seen that done, but that is something that you can do with this as well. This also requires a different buffer spring as well. It's much shorter for use. But this makes this shoot a lot lower cyclic rate, much more controllable, the fact that it doesn't move. Okay, so beginning what we have here is the open bolt position. The trigger is in the lock position with the hammer, so we're ready to fire. So we're going to take a standard 30-round magazine, 5.56 ball. Now, as we pull the trigger, what we're going to see is the bolt's going to move forward, it's going to fire, then it's going to come back. I'm going to fire off a few rounds, and you'll see how it locks back. And we'll see how we're locked open. The whole purpose for open bolt is to prevent cook-offs. If there's no round stuck in the chamber, there's no way for it to absorb heat and have it cook off. The reason for open bolt, it increases, obviously it's cool, it's much cooler, and you don't have the cook-offs. So what we're going to do is we're going to fire off this magazine, and then we're just going to lock open to the rear. Then we're going to show you how the bolt catch works. Okay, now what we'll see, the bolt is now locked open by the bolt catch. So you're going to see when we pull the trigger, you're going to hear it release the bolt to the hammer. So now the bolt has moved forward, so now it's ready to go to the next magazine. If we didn't have that, you would literally have to hit the bolt catch manually to release it. So now, of course, we'll insert a new magazine. We're already in the open bolt position again. You can see it literally does not move. So again, we're going to push the magazine release, and you're going to hear the bolt release to the hammer. You heard that click.
So once Colt Canada was done with the weapon, as you see here, we had a complete weapon system. Colt had put this in their catalogs for several years. Colt Defense, Colt Canada had never had any sale bites on this at all. However, Under Canadian sales with the under the C7, C8 program, these were employed by the Canadian forces, Denmark, as well as in the Netherlands, and I believe in Norway as well. However, when Colt Canada and Damaco would sell these guns, they would not sell them in the open bolt with open bolt mechanism. They would go to a traditional safe semi-auto closed bolt. And these guns would see service in the Global War on Terror, as well as many other campaigns of all those militaries, and it would serve out well. And it was an excellent machine gun. Also, I had not seen any of those versions that were sold with the hydraulic buffer either. However, the hydraulic buffer was always available. The hydraulic buffer was also interesting because it is the only one that I'm ever aware of for this weapons platform that has seen military use. And also, this particular one, you'll be able to refurbish it in case there was any issues with it, with any seals breaking and so forth. Well, in 2001, there was a requested version of the LMG to be produced for the U.S. military trials. So there were some changes that were made. Now, the Canadians had gone ahead and made flat-top versions of this with their Canadian Weaver rail. However, for this particular contract that the U.S. Marine Corps was looking at, they had to have a 1913 rail, which is what they did. Also, there was a carrying handle that was added to that, which is basically a standard carrying handle of the M4 or M16A4. The bipod was redesigned. As you'll see from the photographs, you will see how the bipod was moved to underneath the rear of the handguard, where it came down, and you did have an ability to place a bayonet on there. It was a much more durable and much stronger bipod. And it was designed around the Beta C mag. Now, the Beta C mag is not a magazine I am fond of. I have actually never had access to one that worked. And several companies I know who have gotten them to work, they've had to modify the magazines, but as the gun was submitted to the Marine Corps for the trials, it was utilizing the Beta C mag, hard around Beta C mag. Now, this trial for the USMC was not successful, to say the least. For it, it was left in favor of the M249, and which is an interesting topic that we come across here is when you do have a light support weapon, is it better to have a magazine fed or a belt fed? Well, the benefits of each. Magazine fed, anybody who's within your unit who uses that rifle will be able to provide you ammunition at any given point with no problem. However, if it was belt fed, you certainly have the higher sustained rate of fire of having 100 round belts, but you have to carry those belts. A true light support weapon, the whole point of it is having the high rate of fire is to give your riflemen time to aim, to pick their targets, and to change magazines, and then to keep their heads down. So the belt fed certainly was a much better option. And we're going to end up revisiting that not too many years later down with the new Infantry Automatic Weapons Program. July of 2005, the Marine Corps opens up the new program for the Infantry Automatic Rifle for requests for quotes or requests for samples from throughout the industry for a whole new requirement. This whole new requirement was a weapon that was to replace the M249 belt-fed machine gun with a magazine-fed version of the rifle, which is very strange because from a tactical standpoint, to me, it makes no sense. You're seriously degrading your firepower on the individual level by not having a belt-fed machine gun, but the Marine Corps always goes their own way. They want something that was to have more of a similar appearance to the M4, wouldn't stand out like generally a machine gunner, somebody who would be a target of opportunity for an enemy sniper to take out. And they want something that didn't look as conspicuous. And there are several companies that's made submissions. Well, the Colt Infantry Automatic Rifle, I was there during development of that. And of any of the designs that were put out by H&K and by FN, the Colt version met every requirement that the U.S. Marine Corps asked for and exceeded it. However, in the end, it was adopted by the H&K version. Now, when you look at the two versions, still to this day, makes no sense because the heat sink that was put on the Colt IAR made an unprecedented amount of a service life before failure of any type that I have ever come across in my career. You're looking at doing well over 1,200 rounds before you would have any kind of a failure with consistent fire with just as fast as you could change out the magazines. The concepts for the IAR and the LMG were very, very similar. The biggest difference was the IAR was based off of the M4, where the LMG was based off of the M16A2. You're going to see a chart coming up right now, which is going to show you all the differences between the general characteristics of the IAR versus the Colt LMG. So if you look at the IAR, you're looking at a 16-inch barrel versus a 20-inch barrel. You're looking at a 16-inch heavy barrel You're also looking at a gas system on the LMG. You're looking at a rifle length versus a carbine length on the IAR. Cyclic rate of fire, major difference caused by the use of the carbine gas system versus the full-length gas system of the LSW. Plus, you have the hydraulic buffer in the open bolt machine gun, so you're having a very major, I'd probably say a 20 to 30% at least decrease in cyclic rate of the LSW, which again makes it last that much longer. So I think we're going to go right to the video. We're going to show you a direct comparison between the LSW versus the IAR and cyclic rate of fire. As you can see, the open bolt machine gun made all the difference in the world in making it that much slower, that much more purr like a kitten. However, the IR was a much more portable. It was smaller. The weights were very, very similar, but they were very much the same concept, just built on two different length platforms of the gun. So the IR has gone on to be very successful. The LSW, or the LMG, as we see in this configuration here and in the more modern configurations that were done, are still seeing service in the Middle East with Denmark, with Norway, and with the Netherlands, even though I believe the Netherlands is switching over to the 416, but these guns had been in service. It just never obtained the success that it certainly deserved, because it was an absolutely incredibly accurate rifle. It put down accurate suppressive fire. It didn't move. You did not have the overheating issues that you even had, even with some of the other belt-fed machine guns. It was just a very well-made, very well-thought-out design. Henry Tatro, as I said, he was probably one of Colt's best engineers. He was involved in several of the major projects, and this was his baby. But due to Colt's financial situation and their use of the union and them shutting down, he ended up having to turn this over, along with some other programs, over to the Canadians. And the Canadians rose to it, and they have become a formidable manufacturer and developer. That was part of the reason why Colt Defense bought them, was because they had, in fact, in many ways, the engineering team up at Colt Canada or Damaco was far more advanced than what they had at Colt and Hartford. You had people who were much more qualified. You had much more ability and talent up there for people to do the development, and that's one of the reasons why they were bought. But I do want to thank one of our viewers for sending us this upper receiver for us to take a look at. Thank Brandon over at the Gun Room for providing the full auto lower receiver, so we were able to do all the footage. There's a lot of range footage on here, and the reason I'm putting a lot of range footage on here is because this gun was just really, really neat, and you were to see just how effective it is in so many different holding positions. We generally don't show this much footage, but we're going to in this case. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share. Thank you.